We're going to have an in-depth discussion on this right now. I'm joined by Derek Scissors, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and from Beijing, Chen Jiahe, commentator from Cinda Securities. Welcome to the show, gentlemen, both of you. Let me start with you, Chen Jiahe, in Beijing. You know, there's a lot of talk about what the expectations are. Let me start with the bilateral investment treaty. From Beijing's standpoint, what does Beijing want to talk about, and what do they want the outcome to be on this?
Well, it's actually currently really China needs a lot of investment together with the trading with the United States. One reason is because if you look at the Chinese economy right now, we have a very bad property market. The valuation of the property market is serious. It's about 60 times divided by the rent, the property price. Therefore, means we can't keep on developing the property market. Therefore, we need a strong trade market together with an investment from international markets. The second thing goes to that we have been watching that in the past the foreign investment has been a bit more efficient compared with the local investment, especially the investment from governmental sides, because they are more economical. Therefore, I would say they need this more at this critical moment.
Derek, Secretary Liu was earlier talking when speaking to CCTV about some of the things he'd like China to do. He said China has made progress, but there are still steps that the administration wants China to achieve. What are those steps, and how many of those steps can China achieve, at least in the short term?
I'm not sure it can achieve any of them in the short term. There are some difficult demands or queries the U.S. is making of China. Let's start with the bilateral investment treaty. One of the major terms of a bilateral investment treaty is national treatment, which means you treat foreign companies the same way as you treat domestic companies. American companies are never going to be treated the same way as large Chinese state-owned enterprises, not in the near future, not indefinitely. That's a very difficult thing for the U.S. to ask of China. The U.S. practices a certain kind of cyber espionage. The U.S. wants China to stop practicing a different kind of cyber espionage. That's also a very difficult thing to ask in the context of what the U.S. is doing. So those are two big economic demands or requests from the United States. It's going to be very difficult for China to meet either of them.
Jiahe, I wonder if you're more optimistic there on the other side. They're meeting there. There's a lot on the table. I understand that. But isn't there room for compromise on some of these issues?
Well, yeah, I would say China would keep on opening to and keep on moving to the status that the United States has been expecting. Because if you look at the Chinese economy, it was centrally controlled just about 35 or 40 years ago. Therefore, it's just turned into the market economy. United States has got a market-oriented economy for about 300 years, and before that, British has been doing that for 200 years. So now you suddenly ask the Chinese to do this within 40 years, and China has been doing that greatly. Look at the equity market; it's one of the world's largest. Many industries is fully commercialized. Therefore, I would say China is doing that quickly enough, and the speed has outpaced the expectations in the past 35 years, and I think in the future probably it will be doing that again.
Well, I'm going to follow up with you, Jiahe. What do you think is a reasonable expectation for those watching around the world when they talk about getting an agreement, getting the bilateral treaty? There is skepticism out there, but at the same time, from your perspective, what do you think is a reasonable goal to achieve from these discussions?
Well, it always will be that the conversation inside the United States would think China has not been doing good enough because they are judging from the basis of a U.S. point. But from those who is watching China deeply enough or who has been studying China for a very in-depth research, they would say China has been there doing good enough. So I would say, finally, people would always say both governments have made some compromises, and that's not always the answer, but that's coming out because people had different expectations.
Derek, he brings up a good point. People have different expectations. We're talking about two cultures that are very different. I can tell you from personal experience, when you're negotiating on one side of the table, you have to first agree on definitions of whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's free trade, all these rules. These meetings, something positive, do they work in at least fostering this dialogue?
I think if you're talking about low-level issues, they work. In other words, the U.S. has all these technical standards that it wants to apply. And at the beginning of this process, China didn't even know what a technical standard was. So there's been discussions. Now China has its own technical standards. A lot of progress has been made on those kinds of issues. When you have big clashes of interests, they can be security interests and maritime security interests. They can be subsidies for Chinese firms. They can be intellectual property rights. I don't think the discussion really goes anywhere. China doesn't want to have intellectual property protection the way the United States wants, and it's not going to want to have it for many years to come. So I suppose you could take a look.
Let me stop you there. I apologize to interrupt you, but to be fair, from where China was 5, 10 years ago, I mean, a lot of experts that I speak to say they've come a long ways. Not quite as far as we'd like them to be, at least from your perspective, but haven't they made great strides?
I would say for 35 years, yes. I think going into the WTO accession in 2001, 2002, China had moved very quickly for 25 years. Some people would say too quickly. I don't think a lot has happened in the last 10 years. And whether I'm right or not, I'll tell you that on the American political side in the U.S. Congress, most people are very disaffected with the way China's economic behavior has been, not for 35 years, just the last 10.
Chen Jiahe, we have a little bit of time left. I want to get you back into the conversation. Give me something positive. I mean, look, there are going to be some who are critical of these talks and some who are skeptical, as you just heard from Derek as well. Is there something that China can do during these talks to dispel some of these folks out there?
Well, I would say the progress you have seen that China has been opening the free trade zone, China is doing a lot of legislation, the anti-corruption has been quite well over the past 2 years. So I would say the progress are actually being made, and the announcements will be, I think, will meet people's expectation in this way. There's one thing I want to mention is that because if you look at China right now, its per capita GDP is about $6,000 per year. That's about 1/10 of the US level. So you think about such an economy with 1.3 billion people, what it can do is not comparable to a small economy with a high level of GDP. So I would say that's something you have to consider.
Yeah. A very good point from Beijing, Chen Jiahe, from Cinda Securities, Derek Scissors here in Washington from the American Enterprise Institute. If there's one thing, gentlemen, that I do want to point out, 10 years ago, I highly doubt we'd be having this type of discussion, but thank you for your time. CCTV will continue its coverage of the strategic and economic dialogue in the coming days, of course, and you can find more of our discussions on our website. That's cctv-america.com. You'll have a link there with some of the latest news and the meetings, and that'll be updated as soon as we get those videos and highlights. Once again, it's cctv-america.com.